All right, everyone. Good evening. My name is Daniel Reiche, and I have the pleasure to moderate tonight's event that is presenting and celebrating Professor Karl Widerquist's new book titled Universal Basic Income. Karl has published a lot before on the same topic, but this is now the most prestigious publisher, MIT Press. Karl is a founding editor of the journal Basic Income Studies that exists since 2006 and is published with De Gruyter. It's a German publisher. Maybe that's why you asked me to moderate tonight's panel. And Karl, when you type in Karl Widerquist and Universal Basic Income on Google Scholar, you get, I don't know how many pages of hits. So he has published so much on the topic. For example, the Palgrave International Handbook of Basic Income in 2019. His three most cited academic articles on the Universal Basic Income are The Ethics and Economics of the Basic Income Guarantee. And that's interesting, the ethics and economics, because Professor Widerquist holds two doctorates, one in political theory from Oxford University and one in economics from City University of New York. So the ethics and economics of the basic income guarantee. Then two other most cited papers are Reciprocity and the Guaranteed Income and the Cost of Basic Income, Back of the Envelope Calculations. I have to say, I heard the first time about the universal basic income from Götz Werner. I think you are the only one in the room who knows Götz Werner. Götz Werner is a German billionaire and founder of DM, a retail store chain. So they have around 4,000 shops in the country. He died, I think, 2 years ago. But he was an advocate of the universal basic income, so I saw him many times in talk shows, and he wrote books in German language titled 1,000 euro for everyone. That's how I got exposed to the topic. Now I can reveal a big secret. How did Professor Widerquist became exposed to the topic universal basic income? I did, prior to this event, extensive research to find out. Well, I just asked him. And Karl actually was inspired by Milton Friedman, the high priest of neoliberalism. On his 15th birthday, he watched on TV PBS television series that was popular in the 1980s in the US titled Free to Choose. And there were two episodes, episode 4 and 5, from Cradle to Grave and Created Equal, that were touching the topic. And Karl started on his 15th birthday to think about the universal basic income. So for tonight's event, Karl will give an introduction on the book, and then Ian Almond, which you all know, Professor of World Literature, Anjani Jacob, Professor of Philosophy, and Gabor, who totally failed in his life to introduce universal basic income in Hungary, where he was a member of the parliament before becoming a professor of comparative politics at GUQ. Karl, please start.
This is the see a big stack of books here on Friday, but nothing today. So we do have a sign-up sheet where you can order one in advance, and we also have six of my old books are over there if you want to get something from my back catalog while you're here. But we don't have a single copy of the book here. I want to give an overview of the book so you'll know something about it before you hear the comments on it. This is a short introductory book on basic income. I I wrote some very technical articles on basic income, some technical books on basic income, some on the political economy of it, and others deep into the ethics of it. And then finally, I was contacted by MIT Press. That was a big milestone in my career when MIT Press contacted me and asked me to write an introductory book on economics for their series, Essential Knowledge. And I'm thinking, well, I've been studying this topic for 20 years. I know the essentials. This is going to be the easiest book I ever wrote. Well, I was wrong, because after studying a topic for 20 years, like, well, of all the things I know about this topic, which parts are the essentials? That's a really tough question. So it turned out to be a really difficult book, even though it's shorter than most of my books. It's simpler written. It was hard to write. It was hard to make that breakthrough. But some of it came in when I was speaking with my sort of writing, coaching, publishing mentor, who I think is the mentor of a lot of the faculty here, Carol Sargent, who works on main campus, and she's really great for helping the professors get the most out of their research. And I asked Carol about it, and she said, if they asked you, they want you. They want your perspective more than they want the broad perspective of what everybody's saying. So put a lot of me in this book. That's really what helped me finish it and go for what's really myself. So it starts out, chapter 1, introducing basic income, tells you basically what I mean by it. And then chapter 2, the mechanics of it, takes a little more technical on how it works, how it could fit into a redistributive system. A basic income is basically the idea of putting a floor under everyone's income. A 10-year-old child once described it as, so what you're saying, not to me, but to somebody else who described it making basic income, what he's saying is basically, you're saying income doesn't have to start at zero. Our punishment for somebody who doesn't get a job, who doesn't qualify for any of our conditional programs, our punishment doesn't have to be that you're out there on the street living in a tent begging for food or eating out of a dumpster. It could be a minimum that's enough to live on. We don't need to punish people worse than that to give them an incentive to do the things that we want to do. It's the idea of a much more humane society. Puts a floor under everybody's income. The method of universal basic income does it by giving people the same income whether they work or not. No matter what other income they have, what wealth they have, every month or every week or even every day, every second, you could do it by electronic bank transfer. Every second, you get a tiny amount of money into your bank account so that no one's income is ever zero. No one needs to be destitute. No one needs to lack for food, shelter, and clothing. They've always got an income sufficient for that. On this, we build further. And no basic income movement says this is the end of social justice. This is all there is to it. But this is an important step to making a freer and more humane society. So we do the what it is, the mechanics of it in the first 2 chapters. Then the 3rd chapter is on the history of basic income and related policies. There are a lot of closely related policies. The history and how it's gone in and out of the political system. You mentioned too, like neoliberal people who are interested, but there's also some very, very left people who are interested, and people you wouldn't suspect, like the feminist leader from 100 years ago, the writer Virginia Woolf. She was a pioneer of basic income. Let's see. So then chapter 4 is evidence about its effects. I look to a lot of studies, both on existing problems that move in the direction of existing programs that move in the direction of basic income, and from experiments with basic income and other information that we can get that how this is likely to work, all these evidence of its effects. Chapter 5 looks specifically at Alaska's experience with the closest policy in the world to basic income. It's called the permanent fund dividend. They took money that they made from selling oil put it into a sovereign wealth fund that makes interest, and that interest goes to supporting a very small and variable once-a-year universal basic income. So it's not the same amount all the time, and it's only once a year. It's not enough to live on, but it's arguably the only existing basic income in the world. Dedicate a whole chapter to that one. Chapter 6 is the one where I really put myself into. 6 is the longest chapter of the book, and it's called The Choice Between a Mandatory and a Voluntary Participation Economy, arguing for and against UBI. When you think about a basic income that's high enough for people to live on, it's quite obvious then that means nobody has to take a job if they don't want to. And that aspect of it is immediately, before people know anything else about it, how it's going to affect poverty, how it's going to affect education and other things like that, that immediately divides an audience. Some people instantly, people living without getting jobs and they're not born rich, well, those are bad people then. If they're born rich, that's okay. But if they're born poor and they want to live without working, they're just bad people. They shouldn't get one red cent. And then other people are like, no, we have an unfair economy and people ought to be able to opt out if they want. And usually people are very defensive against that idea that everybody has to work, and they don't want to point out the absurdity in it, that it is, if there is a responsibility to work, that it's only for poor. It's for the poor and the middle class. It's not for the rich. There's never been a responsibility for the rich to work. They can work if they want to. Some of them got rich by working. A lot of them didn't get rich by working. Some of them did. And they can work if they want to. The rest of us work because we have to. Well, there are only two ways from there to establish equality. Either everybody has to work, including the rich, or nobody has to work. I'm opting for the one where nobody has to work. But so in this chapter, I put this very idea that everybody has to work on trial. And I look at a bunch of different arguments for why you could say everybody has to work, and say what's wrong with those and why it's so important that the least among us have the power to say no to bad employment and what they see in their own eyes as bad employment. It's not up to us, the privileged, to look at them and say, well, I've looked at the jobs available to you, and I think you have to work. It's up to them to say, I've looked at the jobs you're giving me, and I'm deciding whether it's good enough for me to take those jobs or not. That, I think, is one of the most powerful things that basic income can do. And as it does that, it does things related to that, because job is not the only thing that people do to keep themselves alive. Some of them have to marry somebody who has money and has to stay married to that person or money regardless of how they're being treated in that marriage. So a system where we don't have a power to say no to bad jobs is also where we don't have the power to say no to an abusive marriage or an abusive spouse or just a cruel spouse. Basic income gives people that kind of leverage. So I make a lot of different arguments along this point in that chapter. It's the largest chapter. Then I have another chapter, chapter 7, on automation. People have made a lot of the automation argument for basic income. And then chapter 8 on the future of basic income. Its future both in research and in politics. What are the prospects that this dream is gonna come to realization in one country sooner or later. And that was a fun chapter to write. Of course, it's highly speculative, though. I believe the future is inherently unpredictable. And my publisher's like, yeah, but you got to say something about it. So I give some speculations there. And so that's what the book is about.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Anjana, would you like to start commenting? Sure.
Thank you, Karl, for your short presentation and for inviting me to speak on the book. I'd like to say at the outset that I really appreciate that it was written very straightforwardly, without jargon, to the point, which is, I think, your characteristic style, but it's a pleasure to see that. I'd like you to say a little bit more about some of the things you touched on about Chapter 6. I didn't really get to Chapter 6. So the question I have in my mind, you said early on that nobody who proposes basic income is suggesting this is the end of social justice, right? So I'd like to hear a little bit more about what a proponent about UBI would say about extending it to incorporate some things that scholars have written about, about the larger economy of work and how it marginalizes people. So I'm thinking about people, of course, Marx has written about alienation, but Rawls has also written about the social basis of self-respect that comes from work. Contemporary philosophers like Andrea Weltman has written about work that is fulfilling. So on the basis of some of that literature, so the first point to note would be that work provides more than income, right? Normally when we think about a job, the first thing is income. But it has been observed that work provides a lot more than that. It's the source of social respect. It's the source of self-respect. It's the source of fulfillment in life, of purpose in life. It is also, for a lot of people who do full-time jobs, you spend more time every day with your colleagues than you spend with your family, right, for 40 years. So it's a fundamental source of social interaction and social relationships. So even if we were to start not at zero for income, right, what about, so right now I'm thinking of somebody like Iris Marion Young, who has written on marginalization, and she points out that even if she doesn't use the term basic income, she wrote, I guess, a bit before that, but she suggests that even if somebody had access to enough benefits that they are not destitute, they are still often shut out from the economy of work and everything else that comes with it, even though the income and the benefits part is taken care of. So she's thinking of the elderly, the disabled, the woman who's stuck at home caring for kids, and so on. So they may get some benefits in the form of a UBI or other benefits, so they're not destitute, but they are marginalized in that these other things I mentioned, they cannot participate in, right? So my question is, I guess, what would you as a UBI proponent say about this, that even if you take care of this, the fact that remains that work is a source of a lot more. So there's opting out, okay, I opt out, but then I'm what, right? I lose a primary source of interaction, right? And a lot of other things that come with it. And related to that is a question, actually, my students read this for their class this morning, right? Andrea Weltman, who's written a lot about work, she divides work into two categories. There's work that is meaningful in the sense of fulfilling to the individual, right? And then there's work that may be, contributing to society but doesn't fulfill you, right? So her example is sanitation work, or we can say the talaba driver or whatever. Work that is useful for other people, but by no means is it exciting to me or contributing to my growth. I wake up in the morning and wow, I get to change 10 diapers a day. I mean, it's not contributing to me, right? To my fulfillment, to my growth and development. So even if you provide a basic income, and then there's work, and given that there are these different classes of work, right? There will still remain this level of exploitation, if you want to put it that way. I don't know if there's a different way to characterize it, but those who are less advantaged in education or in wealth of the parents and so on will take these jobs that we would not take if we had other options, right? The people who clean our bathrooms here at Georgetown and so on, right? So what would, I would understand if as a UBI proponent you were to say, well, those are big philosophical questions, and they are, and we're not really addressing that. We just want to first make sure that people are not destitute, right? And as someone who is from India, which has the largest fraction of the world's extreme poor, right, I fully get that response. If you were to say, that's all interesting philosophically, but right now we just want to make sure everybody's not destitute, right, then I'm okay with that answer as well. But I was just curious from a philosophical point of view if you wanted to say something more.
Perfect. We are collecting the views from the panel and then Karl responds. Gabo, would you like to comment next?
Okay. Is this on? Should I use it? Or? Yeah, it is. Okay.
Yeah. You don't need it for a room this small, but we need it for the room.
Okay. So I'd like to start first by saying that it's, I agree with Anjana, that's an amazingly well-written book. So if you really want to find a very short introduction into the topic, this is a great book to read, very easy to digest. I think you have a very good pedagogical style of getting the message across. So I just like to emphasize this aspect. And it's also very rich, both in terms of normative argument and also empirical detail with all the kind of the experiments. So it has this breadth of both the kind of the philosophical, but also the kind of the more empirical social scientific. So I really do appreciate all this. I also wanted to, like, you started by mentioning how challenging it is to write a short book, which you did so well, and I can relate to it so much. You know, Dania started by introducing me as someone who failed to introduce basic income. Well, we did. I was a politician as a member of parliament, and one of the challenges we had is getting the message across. And very often people would, this was a Green Party that we founded, people would criticize us that, oh, you don't have a program. Well, we had the longest program, which included a basic income, reaching almost 300 pages. No one else, not any other party had that. But I guess the problem was that we didn't really manage to summarize it in such a way as you did it in the case of basic income. So I very much can relate to that. And what I wanted to highlight is basically two aspects that seem to be very specific to your argument, which I find really compelling, and maybe one kind of challenge, not sort of criticism. The first, which is really close to me, is your argument about automation and economic shocks, which I would maybe approach from this notion of the Great Transformation, which is one of my favorite books. It's about the rapid economic changes that were happening not just historically, but also are happening now. And this is something that I was faced when I was growing up. It was a transition from socialism to capitalism, creating a lot of suffering, economic shocks, 7 million Eastern Europeans dying during the 90s. But you have the same in the US with automation, trade shocks, trade globalization, generating a kind of situation where you have a deaths of despair crisis that is completely unique to the United States from these rapid economic changes. And you could go on and on finding different examples, and what you argue is that automation is such an economic shock that is already happening and creating challenges that are very taxing on individuals. And I think there are social coping mechanisms that could help people adjust, like the welfare state, but we also know that the more these changes, the more rapidly that are happening, they tend to overwhelm these old ways of coping, right? So if you think of the unemployment insurance, for example, when you have an economy where everyone is like, not everyone, but an increasing number of people are becoming self-employed, freelancers, Uber drivers are not employees anymore, but freelancers. You have a lot of people moving from one job to the other. These old ways of coping that society allowed for people, or these old institutions are becoming taxed. And one good argument is that basic income could help people adjust to these economic shocks that are already happening. And the shock of automation, robotization is already a shock that is happening. So you don't need to kind of speculate about the future, how robots will take away your jobs. It's already creating these rapid changes. Even if the employment rates remains the same, you have to adopt in such a way that is taxing, that creates all kinds of psychological and physical suffering. The other thing that I think this is very unique to you is the normative argument that you make for basic income, starting from the way the private property regime is organized, right? How there's no good justification for the way it works, and you approach this from the perspective of independence or freedom. I think that was your previous book we discussed here, laid out this whole argument, and I think you of course describe this in your book, and I think that's very specific to you, which makes this book very much worth reading. And my kind of thinking about the challenge aspect is related to this issue of work as a source of identity. I'm not talking about basic income leading to significantly lower employment rates. You bring all the data why it's implementable, it can be funded, it doesn't mess up the labor market. But what I'm talking about is that you need a political support coalition, both to introduce it, but also to kind of all the other kinds of social coping mechanisms, the welfare state. These all depend on a political support coalition. If you don't have that, that it will go away, it will collapse, or in the case of basic income, it won't get introduced. And the kind of masses that pushed for the welfare state solutions were working class masses, and for them, identity through work was central. So if you read like E.P. Thompson or Michel Lamont, this whole idea of working hard and this being essential to who you are as a worker was crucial to organizing the kind of support coalition that allowed for these kind of coping mechanisms that I'm talking about. But then basic income can be framed in a way, I don't think it does normatively, but it can be framed in a way that says that basically your work is not a source, is not a key source of identity. And I think that's a challenge, and that's something that when I was campaigning for basic income, that was the most frequent response that I got was that work is such an important, crucial part of identity. And then it can, of course, lead to other kinds of counter-arguments once you establish this kind of work identity. Of course, you mentioned this welfare state, and we know that a lot of like the Milton Friedman type of supporters of basic income want to get rid of the whole issue of welfare state because for them it decreases people's likelihood to work, which is, we all know it's not true. But what I wanted to flag is that is like what I want to hear more from you is from the pragmatic perspective, not from the normative, but from the creating the political support coalition. How would you kind of get around this challenge? Thank you. But I'd like to really emphasize how much I enjoyed reading the book.
Ian.
Okay, thank you. Like Gabor and Anjana, I really enjoyed reading. I didn't read it all. I hope that doesn't affect my grade. But I really enjoyed. I thought it was really amazing how you wrote so discursively. So congratulations on this, and it's the first of many, as Daniel said, it's the first of many books you've made. And this is coming from a positive direction. By the way, as a literary professor, I just should say beforehand that Virginia Woolf was a little bit of a fascist, so let's not get too carried away. Sorry to rain on people's pie. I think as someone who generally supports the idea of basic income and has always supported like your work and the passion with which you throw in it, there was kind of 2 points. I've got two sort of, well, one is a reservation and one is a question. The reservation I think I have towards universal basic income is like, I can't see how universal basic income, and I know you've said something about this already and that you're not giving these vast visions or comprehensive responses right now, yeah? I can't see how it will work within a free market capitalist society. Because if there's a thing which is killing us at the moment, and when I say killing, I mean metaphorically, I mean economically, I also mean literally, yeah? If there's something which is killing us at the moment in this planet, it's the way groups of powerful, wealthy people are grabbing hold of resources, grabbing hold of property, grabbing hold of healthcare, of education, and monetizing it, and the prices are just skyrocketing. And if there's a single thing in so many countries, and the countries that I live in and that I have experience of, you know, is India, it's Turkey, and it's the UK. That is like the primary cause of people's suffering at the moment. So, for example, there's a line right at the beginning of the book where you say UBI would solve the housing problem. I don't think in London it would. The housing problem in London is such a racket. It's so many exploitative landlords that I don't think it would even begin to address the crucial problem here of price control. So that is my first point. It's almost like the boat's sinking and you're bailing out water of a sinking boat. We need to plug the holes in it first. And arriving fundamentally at trying to understand the way we arrive at the prices for things, yeah? How do we arrive at the prices for the education? You know, the $60,000, I know this is touchy, but the $60,000, you know, we charge as a year, and we professors profit from, right? We are part of this package. You know, how we need a radical way of addressing systemically, hand in hand with universal basic income, we need a radical way to address a way of controlling and capping these kinds of prices. So that was my first sort of gut reaction, yeah? And has always been towards UBI. And then the second is really sort of probably very different, but in some ways related. And I was just kind of wondering whether you place, or how you place universal basic income within a context of, historical context of colonialism and decolonialism. To what extent you historicize. Yeah? I'm saying this as a child, a working class child of the British welfare state. Yeah, I grew up in the 70s, you know, and Gabor is also, we've talked about this, yeah, working class backgrounds. And, you know, I only realized much later that the welfare state of Britain, and to a greater extent of many European countries, which I'd always believed in passionately, and I still do, but they were kind of built on the backs of a history of 19th and 20th century colonialism. So how do you situate the possibility of a global basic income, a global basic income in this, given particularly the rigged neocolonial system, which is the currency system, yeah? The idea, the fact that you can work for a year in Bangladesh to live for a week with those earnings in London, or you could work for a week in London and live for a year in Bangladesh, yeah? That's a fundamentally unjust system. That's a colonially rigged system. So I was really curious how you would insert UBI into that. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, these are really interesting comments. It's great. So I wish I'd have talked to you before I finished the book, because if I had, probably there would be in that chapter 6. Chapter 6 has, 14, 15 sections on different aspects. Chapter 6 is the one where I'm arguing from a normative standpoint about basic income and about how does it affect jobs, how does it affect women and things like that. I probably would have added a subsection there on marginalization. Now maybe I still will actually, because when I did my first draft of this book and I sent it off to the publisher, that chapter, he said, she said, you really got to change that chapter. There's a lot of good stuff in here, but you make basic income opponents sound like they're all mustache-twirling villains, which is okay, maybe how I see them. But what she's saying there, if you do that, you've got a whole bunch of people who are just open-minded to the idea. They've heard a lot of the arguments on the other side, and they haven't really heard a lot of the arguments on your side. These aren't, and they might be sympathetic with what they've heard. It's all they hear, you might just turn them off by treating the opponents as these mustache-twirling villains. So I softened the language and tried to be as hard-hitting, but then I was like, well, I really like that first version. So that first version, I put it up as a blog, as a series of blog posts, and then I enlarged it when I thought of other ideas. So that's up to about 20 of those, a series of the mandatory participation on trial. Maybe one on marginalization, because now there are two things about marginalization. One is basic income can't solve it on its own. You're going to have some policies to fight marginalization directly. However, I also want to point out how far basic income goes to helping to fight that problem. And this, I think, also goes along with things like work as a source of identity, because basic income is money, and money is power. And when we're saying we don't want to share the wealth with people regardless even if they refuse to work, we're really saying unless the lower class and the middle class take orders from the more privileged people in society all day, we want them to have no money and therefore no power. And we're all beggars, please, sir, may I have a job? Now, and a lack of power is a big source of marginalization. When the marginalized groups have a secure source of income and money that they can pool and work together with, they can create their own sources of power and say, jobs are one way to get an identity. But what is it that we can build? Those of us here who've been marginalized, what can we get together with this money that we now have, with this power that we now control? What can we build together that will be a source of meaning and a source of belonging and something to fight marginalization with the money and power that we have? I think it could go a very long way. People could set up their own legal defense fund, their own cooperatives, their own networks of mutual aid and things like that. People need some seeds of power in order to really be able to help each other and bring each other up. Now, that doesn't, but it is true that is not going to solve everything. It's not going to solve every source of alienation. It lets people walk away from what they view as the worst sources and try to build other things, but there's always somebody who doesn't fit in. Even when you have these 10 different groups fighting marginalization in different ways and building up their own cooperatives and things, there's always going to be a few people that don't fit in with any of those. And we do need direct things for all of those people, and that's going to depend on a lot of specifics, that some of which are not something that I have any expertise in how to work out those specific. When you think about now, it's a job as a source of self-respect. It can be. I think it's a terrible argument for forcing people to work whether they want to or not. You don't have any self-respect unless you do what I tell you, so I'm going to starve you until you do what I tell you because it's good for your own self-respect. Horrible argument. Really condescending argument if there ever was one. But it is true that very often jobs give sources of self-respect. Some jobs do, some jobs don't. Now, what basic income might not be, even though it gives you power to start things on your own, it might not get you out of that situation where the only jobs available to you are the lowest ones on the totem pole and the ones that don't give you a big source of self-respect. On some aspects, it might. You might be able to build something on your own that gives you much better feeling of self-respect than those lower-end jobs. But to some people, that's going to be it. And we need to find things that are going to fight that. Okay, now let's see. And that, I think, gets to what you were saying about Gabor, about the despair crisis. It can certainly cushion, a basic income can certainly cushion the economic blow to losing your job because of automation or whatever else is going to cause you to lose your job. And in that sense, then, it can also help fight the despair that often comes in that. And help people adjust, and they can try to look for should I go outside the job market and build a cooperative or build art, or should I temporarily leave the job market to get education and re-enter the job market at a place that's better for me? But there will be some people that none of those avenues end up working for them. So it's not necessarily going to cure despair. It's going to cure some of the worst side effects of despair, where you're living on the street. But it is. It might not cure the despair you get when you say, wow, nobody wants my contribution. And that we need specific policies to deal with that. And if we're not dealing with problems like homelessness and all of the other side effects of poverty, then we can focus more attention on what are the specific needs of people, what kind of alienation are they feeling. Now, organizing for it is a really different thing. I've never considered, as much as I've worked on basic income, I've been working on basic income since the 20th century. But I've never considered myself a leader in the activist movement for establishing a basic income. Some people in the activist movement have come to me as a leader on researching about its effects and making philosophical arguments for it. But how to organize for it is something that I still feel an outsider to after all of these years. But what I do think really, and I've argued this in my last book on property, that what really will make basic income a policy that remains if people get committed to the idea of independence as a value that we share. And let me explain what I mean by that. Probably the most popular value in justifying the state in the world today is some idea of a social contract. There's various ideas out there from Hobbes to Rawls that are very different, but the state benefits of it all. We all get benefits from it, so we should all contribute to it. But if we all contribute to it, we should make sure we all share in some of the benefits. I don't think that real politics works that way. There might be a social contract for the insiders, but that's an insider's contract. But there's always outsiders who are subject to the contract, but don't really have a part in formulating it. And if we have this, but we love to pretend that, oh, you benefit too. You benefit, so we can tell you what to do. What I think we should look at society is not as a social contract, but a society is a bunch of people who are stuck together. And we've made rules. And whoever makes the rules is, by virtue of the fact that they get to make the rules, is privileged. And by being privileged, they less understand what the less privileged people are going through. So we should all commit ourselves to the value that we want to build a society not on the mandatory participation of a social contract, but on the independence of, I want to build a society where everybody who contributes voluntarily. I want to respect, instead of I respect your contribution as you respect my contribution to this social contract we built, we're all stuck here together for a while, like Rodney King said. We're all stuck here for a while. I respect your independence as I want you to respect my independence. I want to build a society that you want to participate in voluntarily. But if I can't do that and you don't want to participate, I'm not going to force you to participate. And I'm going to create policies like basic income and like specific housing policies and things that are going to make it so you participate only when you deem that we have earned your voluntary participation. When enough of us believe in that norm, then we'll have basic income and it'll be politically stable. Now, about the housing, I hope I didn't say that it will solve the housing crisis. I think I might say it would eliminate homelessness. That is far from solving the housing crisis. Housing crisis, we need a lot of specific policies about. This is at least one where I know something about those specific policies. Housing and real estate are unaffordable for a lot of very specific and verifiable reasons. And there's reasons that both sides complain of. People on the libertarian right will say it's all about zoning laws. Well, it's not all about zoning laws, but it is partly about zoning laws. When we zone out affordable housing, when we say every house has to have a big lawn around it, we are making it so poor people can't afford housing in this area, and they can't afford transportation either because everything's so far apart. When we say we can't build buildings over a certain size, or no apartments in this area at all, and apartment buildings here only over a small size, those zoning laws are making it harder for people to build affordable housing. We can change those zoning laws. But also we got to do a lot of things on the other side. One thing is that the greater you have inequality, the worse the worse the disparity in real estate is going to be. Because the trickle-down explanation is, oh, you give a lot of money to rich people and they'll invest it, and that investment is going to give jobs in people. And sometimes people do invest money in businesses. Sometimes they invest money in real estate. They just buy real estate. And you know what you have when you got richer and richer people all wanting to invest their money in real estate? You have prices going up and up and up. The more inequality you have, the more inequality, you have an exaggerated inequality in real estate prices. So if you want, any kind of tax that is going to reduce inequality is going to create more affordable housing, because it takes away that money that the rich are just parking in real estate, making housing less affordable for everyone. But there's another thing you can do, is directly tax real estate value. That sounds like something that would push up prices, but actually what it does is your landlord is already charging you as much as you can afford already. If they're not, they're a dumb landlord. Landlords, that's their job, to figure out how much you can afford and how much they can get away with charging. If you don't have any more money, they can't charge you anymore. But if they pay more taxes, that money comes out of their profit. Taxing landlords is a very good way to get a profit out of investing in the ownership of land. You do that, you also reduce the speculative value of buying land. And so this constant things of always pushing up the price of land goes out of the system, and you use some of that money to distribute to everyone else. You get a system where you have much more affordable housing, more housing available, and people with the money to buy the housing. So a basic income there, coupled with land reform, is, I think, system. Now, what deeper things we need to address the system, again, gets out of my areas of expertise, but the fact that money is power goes to the thing that I think Marx most myths. Marx recognized big problem in the system, worker has nothing to sell but their labor, meaning no way to keep themselves alive except selling their labor. Yet, Marx suggested everything else except for taking the worker out of that position. When socialist revolutions happened, I don't know how true the Marx they are, but not a one of them said, we're going to take the worker out of the position where they have nothing to do but sell their labor. They said, well, we're a worker state, everybody sells their labor, and then it's just a new upper class. The ruling party becomes the upper class instead of the ownership party. Power in the hands of the people is in the hands of the people in the form of, I can say no to bad jobs, is a really important, is an important source at what's wrong with capitalism. A system where some people have to work and other people don't have to work. And the very people that we have to work for are the people who themselves don't have to work. It is a huge change to capitalism as we know it. All right, that's a long response to those.
So I suggest before we move to the reception that we collect a couple of questions, and then Karl can make like a final statement. I would also like to ask something, but there's no need that I'm the first. Who would like to ask a question? Yes, please.
First of all, thanks, Karl, for the book. Congrats on it. I'm sure it was excellent. I haven't read it yet, of course, but I'll sure I'll pick up a copy as soon as I can. I just want your thoughts on this recent study on UBI. It was released a couple months ago in July by the National Bureau for Economic Research. It was a big working paper that was released, and amongst its findings, it found that people were given around $1,000 a month, so $12K a year for UBI, I think in Detroit and Atlanta. And the findings were that, amongst other things, people actually lost income around $1,500 based on the findings. Labor force participation decreased by 2%. Recipients worked about 1 hour less per week on average. And this is amongst other things. Even leisure time increased, but there was no significant uses of that time for things like job training, education, or self-improvement. So just my question, and also 20%, so what else was that? As I said earlier, 20% due to decreased work effort as well. So given these findings, how would you address concerns about the economic feasibility of UBI, especially in terms of funding it without overburdening taxpayers, particularly middle-income earners, especially in countries like the United States and other developing countries, or developed countries?
Okay.
Yeah.
So, we're just collecting several.
Christian.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Hi. So I'm not a libertarian, but I'm interested in knowing how you would respond to the libertarians who would say that funding a basic income would create an unfair burden on those who have property, right? I take it that your answer is that the property system is unjust already, but then my question would be, do you make a distinction between property that is justified and property that is not justified, right? Like, for example, the basic income would punish me as a professor, the same as others who are super wealthy, right? I mean, I would have to afford the basic income for others, and also the very rich, right? So why punish me equally the same as the very rich? So that's the question.
In the first row.
Hey, Professor Karl, or I think I'm supposed to call you Coach. My question is more sort of touching upon what Professor Ian Ullman said about sort of taking water out of the ship while there's still holes in the ship. I sort of want to understand, like, on a fundamental level, what makes UBI a better policy than simply just solving the issues that you talked about, different social programs regarding housing, whatever other scarcity that there is. You know, when it comes to property, what makes it better than just abolishing private property or something along those lines? What makes UBI the sort of like more of a fundamental solution to a problem rather than just sort of like, I don't know, like taping issues up and not really like fundamentally fixing them?
Thank you. Then I would ask the last. There's one more. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Professor Karl. I'm a third-year student in Northwestern University. I'm a journalism student, and you rightly pointed it out. I'm from Bangladesh, so actually, you know, a week's income in London could sustain someone in Bangladesh for over a year. So my question is, especially if we are looking at the middle income or lower middle income people, if UBI is introduced at certain point, then probably they are going to spend it on like regular things, food, groceries, and all of these. And suddenly, if let's say once it's introduced, everyone has a chunk of money to spend on that, and suddenly the prices rise. The next month it goes up and up. So like, if UBI is indeed introduced, will it be adjusted like at certain intervals? And if it is so, when does it end? Like, you give money and then prices rise, and then again, then like when does it finally end? How is it achievable, if, you know, considering inflation and other things?
I would like to ask you the same question I asked you when I met you the first time in early 2021. How do you apply your research on Qatar and the Gulf? What are your selling points for the UBI for Qatar? And maybe what are the lessons that can be learned from Alaska, also like a hydrocarbon state kind of? And Ian talked about the differences between England and Bangladesh. So there are differences between countries, but also within countries. And we have a huge wealth gap here in Qatar. And of the 3 million people that live here, only 380,000 are Qatari, 13%, and 87% are foreigners. So would the idea be that everyone, regardless of nationality, gets a UBI?
Okay. Oh, gotta get my
Your homework there.
yeah. So, okay. The first question was about this NBER study. Well, there were several issues with the NBER study, which was the first was there was one thing about it that was the way they reported it was misleading. Was they said you give people basic income and their income goes down. Well, what they meant was their income from labor goes down. They made it sound like their total income goes down. Give people you give people $1,000 a month. Their labor income went down by $100 or $200 a month. So their actual income went up by $800 or $900 per month. Their total income. It was merely their income from labor. Then so that part was misleading. But what I thought was wrong with it is because they immediately, that report was all about judging the behavior of the recipients of basic income. The people, the very privileged people who have jobs at the NBER, thought they could judge what the very unprivileged people who were eligible for the study, what was a good use of their time. They thought they knew what was right for someone else. Well, I don't think I know what's right for someone else. Maybe the reason they worked less because they had crap jobs and they needed to relax more. And if that's what they decided they needed, and they decided it was good for them to relax on the couch for, 2 hours a week or 3 hours a week, that their average job, we're begrudging the poor 3 hours a week of extra time because they didn't go out there and jump and take it to school, go to school or get retraining or something like that. That's the mentality we have. Every time the people less privileged than us have to earn our appreciation. No, it is the other way around. We've grabbed all the privileges. We should be justifying ourselves to the less privileged rather than asking them to justify something for us. If we're so productive and what we do is so good for society, let's share it with everyone and then we can prove it. Yeah, look, I contributed to this basic income. Every single person in the country has benefited from this. Yeah, finally I've justified what I've done. First we got to justify it ourselves to the less privileged. Then we can ask them to justify themselves to us, and if so, we can give an extra reward for that. If they want if you want an extra reward over the social minimum of basic income, then you got to justify it. But if you're a recipient of basic income, you are the least privileged person in society. You get less consumption of resources than everyone else does. People shouldn't be judging you. They gave you the worst spot. Not a lot of people would stay with basic income if they could get a job as a supermodel or something like that. Just stand there, take my picture, okay? So we got, if we're the ones for boarding the supermodels, we got no business judging the people that can't be supermodels and are living off basic income. Now, middle-class workers, two questions were Christian and Rod both asked about like middle-class workers, are you punishing me the same as the wealthy? Well, no, the basic income, in the way I would like to see it structured, would make net recipients out of 70% of the U.S. population. It'd be similar in the UK. That's the only place that I've done empirical studies. If you had a large basic income and a moderate tax rate on income, say the tax rate is the same for everybody, if the tax rate, even if the tax rate is the same for everybody, rich and poor, you as a middle class person are not paying the same taxes the rich person is, because that basic income is a much bigger chunk of your income than a higher up person. So if we have a basic income of $20,000 a year, and we have a tax rate of even a really high one, like 50%, everybody who's making under $40,000 a year is going to be a net recipient of that. That means a family of two that's making $80,000 a year. Everyone of that is going to be a net recipient. That is, they're going to make a net beneficiary. They're going to make more in their basic income than they pay in taxes. And you can structure it, if you lower the tax rate and have a generous one, you can give that up well below the thing. The taxes need to be coming from the people who are most privileged. And that's easy to do because most of the Western industrialized countries have been lowering the tax burden on the wealthiest 1% for the last 50 years, at the same time that we've been buying more stuff from the donor class. The government buys the crap rich people want to sell to the government, like military equipment we don't need, or pennies that no one wants, because some lobbyist pays for that. And so we're buying stuff, and the 1% are the ones that are paying those lobbyists. We're buying stuff from them, and then we're not taxing them. So yeah, it's really easy to do this if you have the political power to do this without burdening people in the middle. This is good for the middle because it gives them leverage. Middle people are part of those people that they work because they have to as well. the leveraged basic income can give those people is important as well. Now, Amir asked, it's Amir, right? Yeah, Amir asked, are other problems more basic? There are many basic problems, but I don't think there is any more basic problem than what I see as problems happened since we've settled into cities. When our ancestors were nomadic hunters and gatherers, anybody that didn't like the way everybody else could do it could wander off in the woods, and they could hunt, and they were already an expert at hunting, gathering, fishing, or they could farm, whatever else. People who have direct access to the land don't have to follow anyone's orders. Then, beginning with the pharaohs in Egypt and the kings in Sumer, we started saying the people don't have direct access to the land. The privileged have direct access to the land, and the vast majority of people get no access to the things that can keep them alive unless they take orders from the rich. That is the most basic problem, long before capitalism came along. In the pharaoh's economy, that was the most basic problem. There are other basic problems, but until we're ready to free the privileged from the position where they have no choice but to follow the orders of the more privileged, we've got the same basic problem that ancient Egypt had. Okay, now there was a question about inflation. You have basic income, people buy stuff, price of that stuff goes up. Well, that's true. That's what taxes are for. The reason you have taxes is not because you need to get the money. Government prints money. Well, we don't need to get the money to have taxes. We have taxes because we don't want inflation. We have stuff. When people buy stuff, that pushes prices up. But when you take money out of the economy with taxes, say everybody go get some money and give it back to me, the tax man, that puts downward pressure on prices. So the taxes that you're having on upper income are going to reduce their spending. That reduces demand for goods from those goods. So that frees up all of the things that were contributing, all of the resources that we collectively, society, devoting to the consumption of the rich. Another jet for the rich, a 10th house for this wealthy person or something like that. Fewer of those resources, fewer of our resources go to producing those things, more to the things that people with the basic income demand. With those things, you've got to balance those two forces. That's what you have, spending and taxes. Just a well-designed spending and taxes plan can have an economy that's where the government spends more money, but it's not accompanied by inflation. Now, these are important questions for our unique thing. I've done other sessions on this book. This is the first one I've done in this country. How does it apply here? Now, I have, as much time as I've spent here, I've not done formal research on the economy of Qatar. But what I understand is there's two ways we could look at this as a basic income. A basic income, as most people call it, a citizen's income. But citizens in this country, citizens are a small part of this income. The Alaska dividend is not a citizen's income. It is for every legal resident, including resident foreigners. Now, if we did that in Qatar, I mean, I don't need it. I'm pretty well paid. I'd probably be a net contributor if we had that. But if we did that and got a little more power into the hands of the least advantaged among us, I think that would be great for Qatar. But I also think it would be better for, even if it was just a citizen's income, it would be better for this country. Because what I understand happens a lot is that they don't want any Qataris to be poor, but they don't want to just say, okay, Qatar's a big corporation, everybody gets a share, here's your dividend check for Qatar, for your share of the ownership in Qatar's natural resources. They could do that, and if they did that, they wouldn't have to give everyone a government job, and Qataris could leave the jobs that they have guaranteed to them, and they could be going out and starting businesses and doing other things. Qatar needs to work more than it has for self-sufficiency in the future. The oil money's not always going to be there. We need to do things that build self-sufficiency. If we were less dependent on super cheap migrant labor and more on just give everybody a base and then pay whatever it costs to get, and you could have a really rockin' good basic income in this country for the citizens though. Only you got to get them enough, get somebody that's got that really super high, fully automated luxury cuttery socialism, get a basic income that's that high, and then say, what do we get to do the crap that needs done in this country, because we don't want to bring in $1 an hour foreigner to do this. If they did that, Qatar would be in a much better position to build something sustainable here for the future. So I think it's a much better way to do it. All right. Now, differences between countries. Yeah, and you talked about globalization. Well, of course, I would love to see a global basic income. And there is a group called Give Directly that is trying to reform charity, that a lot of people in wealthy countries are giving money to people in lower income countries. But often a lot of that money goes into questionable political leaders in those countries and questionable projects. Somebody gets an idea, I'll give everybody a cow, and they don't follow up and the cows starve or something like that. But Give Directly is experimenting with using money that people donate to bypass the political leaders, give directly to individuals. That's why they call it Give Directly. And they're finding that this really makes a difference in people's lives. On a charitable basis, we can start to move in that direction. On a political basis, it's really difficult because the world is divided into about 200 nation states, and it's not a great system, but nobody knows how to fix it without running tanks over neighboring nation states, and that's a bad idea. So we're stuck with a nation-state system. I think if we start doing it on a national basis, that gives us an impetus for doing it on a global basis. But yeah, the global system, that's a big problem to change.
Is the world divided into 200 states? I thought it was kind of divided into about 7 states.
7 blocks of states, yeah.
I never got that.
Yeah.
Okay, but I think the suggestion to have a global universal income is very good final words for this event. That would be, of course, ideal. I think we have exceeded already the planned time and can move forward to the reception. Thank you all for coming, and thank you very much to the panelists and Karl. Yeah.